The early light of morning filtered through the factory windows like thin threads of gold, catching in the dust that never quite settled. At Grayson Industries, the day began long before the machines roared or the foreman shouted. And long before any name badge clocked in, Raymond Ellis was already there. Silent, steady, unseen. He moved like a man born of routine, not out of habit but of necessity. Every motion, folding his gray work shirt, knotting the laces of scuffed black boots, pushing the mop across concrete floors, was deliberate, clean, precise. He didn't rush, nor did he ever pause unnecessarily. Time to Raymond was not a burden. It was a measure of discipline. Few people knew him by name. Fewer cared to. The janitorial staff lived on the periphery in the hierarchy of Grayson's sleek operation. Maintenance men existed in the margins, just beyond the buzzing lights and the security scans. Even among them, Raymond was an anomaly. He didn't joke, he didn't complain, and he never missed a day. Most of the younger workers called him Old Ray, not unkindly, but with the careless familiarity of people who assume the elderly have no story beyond their present utility. One or two, like the warehouse clerk Jalen Brooks, noticed something different. How Ray always sat facing the door. How his eyes tracked exits before his hands moved. How he avoided stepping into shadows unless he meant to disappear inside them. "Morning, Mr. Ellis," Jalen greeted one Tuesday, a paper cup of coffee in hand. Raymond nodded, not slowing his steps. "Morning, Jalen." It was the only interaction he ever allowed himself. That, and a gentle correction when someone misused a cleaning solvent. But behind those eyes, steady, clear, old but not dull, there was something more, something held. For nearly 15 years, Raymond had walked the same halls, pushed the same mop, and watched the same indifferent faces float by. Executives with polished shoes and dismissive glances. Interns who smiled nervously, then forgot him the moment they turned away. Even Martin Graves, the plant manager, only acknowledged him when there was a spill or an inspection due. And that day, there was both. Graves, with his usual clipped tone, stopped Raymond outside the main conference room. "We've got Navy brass flying in tomorrow. Important ones. This place needs to sparkle. I want every inch spotless. Windows, floors, even the stairwells." Raymond met his eyes briefly, just long enough to nod. "Oh, and Ellis," Graves added, lowering his voice. "During the event, stay out of sight. We don't want visitors seeing distractions in the background." Raymond didn't flinch. He just responded with the same phrase he always did when insult dressed as instruction. "Yes, sir." He returned to the hallway without a sound, mop gliding along the floor like it was smoothing out the world's edges. But something had shifted. Not in his expression, which remained calm, nor in his pace, which stayed measured. It was in the silence. In the long, deliberate inhale before he resumed his work. As if a door inside him had opened slightly and he had chosen not to walk through. Yet. That night, back in his modest apartment, tucked deep within the worn edges of East Ridge, Raymond followed his usual routine. A plain dinner, a few pages from a weathered book on maritime history, a slow cup of coffee in his chipped mug that read "World's Best Grandfather," though he had no grandchildren, and no children either. But instead of going straight to bed, he paused beside the old refrigerator. Slowly, almost reverently, he moved it away from the wall. There, behind a panel so discreet it might have been part of the structure itself, was a small metal case. Locked. Untouched for years. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. It was enough to know it was still there. That his truth hadn't vanished completely. Even if the world pretended he had never existed. Outside, rain whispered against the window like a memory trying to speak. And tomorrow, when the Navy officers arrived and everyone played their roles, Raymond Ellis would be in the shadows. Just where they thought he belonged, but the shadows remember. And so did he. The morning came wrapped in ceremony. Blue uniforms shimmered under the factory's fluorescence. Grayson Industries had rolled out its finest illusions, flags on every column, coffee brewed strong, and an overeager intern handing out glossy pamphlets titled Forging the Future of Defense. The plant had never looked cleaner or more hollow. Raymond Ellis mopped the far hallway out of view, as instructed. He didn't need to see the audience to know how the day would unfold. He could hear it, the carefully rehearsed speeches, the applause that arrived half a second late, the names of men with stars on their collars and spotless shoes on their record. But then something unexpected. A voice, not loud, not theatrical, but it stopped him mid-motion. As we honor this new chapter between the Navy and Grayson Industries, the speaker said, I'd like to take a moment to remember those who served in the shadows, the ones whose names were never spoken, the ones whose valor never made it into headlines. Raymond's grip tightened around the mop. Some operatives, the voice continued, were so effective, so critical to national security, that their very existence was buried by the system they served. That voice, the cadence, the controlled authority. Raymond turned. Through the open door of the main auditorium, standing at the podium in full-dress uniform, was Commander Alex Monroe. And then he said it. Phantom Echo. 2 words, one ghost resurrected. The name was never meant to be heard aloud again. It belonged to a man the government had redacted, buried, and erased. It wasn't a name, it was a scar stitched into classified files and blacked-out reports. But now it echoed across a room full of officers and cameras. Raymond stood frozen, mop dripping onto the polished floor. A hush fell over the room as Monroe looked straight at him. He saved 39 lives in Southeast Asia, the commander said. One of them was my father's, yet he wears no medals. His name appears nowhere, but he exists, and he's standing right there. All eyes turned, all silence pointed. Raymond could have run. He had done so before, faded into the background, let the lie breathe longer. But this time he stood, not tall, not proud, just still, unmoving, unapologetic. The auditorium stirred with unease. 2 men in suits edged toward the podium, clearly not Navy. One grabbed the mic. The other whispered into Monroe's ear, urgency laced with threat. Raymond backed away slowly. Someone was calling his name now, his real name, not the code name they buried him under. He turned and disappeared into the hallway. Moments later, he was gone. But the story was no longer his alone. By the time Raymond reached his apartment, the videos had already gone viral. Retired janitor identified as elite Black Ops legend, read one headline. Government denies existence of Phantom Echo, said another. He ducked into the service entrance, avoiding the vans parked out front. Inside, the apartment felt altered. Slight shifts. A chair is angled differently. A light was left on. The refrigerator moved a half-inch too far from the wall. They had been here. He checked the panel. The metal case, gone. Everything inside it, the unredacted orders, the black and white photo from Angola, the bullet casing from his first confirmed rescue, erased again. This time with more precision. He sat down, the weight of it pressing through his bones. Not from fear, but from familiarity. It had happened before, quietly, completely, and always with impunity. His phone rang, no caller ID. He answered, a voice he hadn't heard in 20 years. Calm, low, familiar. Ray, they know. They're watching you again. He closed his eyes. Elijah? Safe house still works, the voice said, if you want it to disappear again. Raymond exhaled. I'm done disappearing. The safe house in Eastgate hadn't changed much in 20 years. From the outside, it looked like a neglected row home wedged between 2 pawn shops. Paint peeling, mailbox rusted, curtains drawn tight against the world. But behind the reinforced door and biometric lock was a different world, one of control, silence, and secrets that refused to die. Elijah Boyd, once known as Whisper, opened the door before Raymond even knocked. He was older now, silver hair cropped short, lines deep at the corners of his eyes. But the gaze was just as sharp as it had been in Liberia, 1986. That time, Elijah had extracted 3 hostages using only his voice and a single folding knife. Raymond Ellis, Elijah said softly, or should I say phantom echo. Raymond stepped inside. I need your help. Elijah locked 3 bolts, drew the curtain, and nodded toward a worn leather chair. Then sit down. We've got catching up to do. They spoke in low tones, no emotion. Just facts, traded like currency. Raymond told him everything. Commander Monroe's public reveal, the stolen metal box, the unmarked men, the blocked calls. Elijah didn't flinch. He had predicted it long ago. They're not afraid of you, Elijah said finally. They're afraid of what you represent. Proof, Raymond replied. No. Elijah met his eyes. Memory. They can erase files, destroy tapes, redact mission logs, but they can't scrub the stories from our minds. And now you're speaking. Raymond reached into his coat and pulled out a thin, encrypted flash drive. They didn't get all of it, he said. Elijah inserted the drive into his secured terminal. As the screen flickered to life, decades unfolded. Photos from Nicaragua. Unclassified maps are marked with black ink. A short video clip, grainy but undeniable, of a 1983 extraction mission in Laos. In it, a younger Raymond carried a wounded soldier across a muddy field under fire. Is that? Elijah leaned closer. Thomas Parker. He got a silver star, Raymond said flatly. Never mentioned who saved him. Elijah sat back. You know what this means? Raymond nodded. It's not just about medals anymore. It's about them knowingly rewriting history and using men like us to do it. They were both silent. Then Elijah opened a cabinet and retrieved a sealed envelope. I kept something too, he said, handing it over. Transcripts from Operation Crosspoint, intercepts, field notes, and a copy of an order signed by Whitlow, the one that left you behind in Iraq. Raymond's eyes narrowed. I knew that mission was sabotaged. And now you can prove it. The next day, Raymond watched as his real name, began to reappear online, not just as a trending tag, but as a question, a challenge. Who is Phantom Echo? Why was his name erased? What else is the government hiding? Evening news anchors debated ethics in classified warfare. Veterans forums exploded with speculation. Civil rights groups demanded congressional inquiries. And behind closed doors, the Pentagon scrambled. Then came the message from Jalen Brooks. It arrived encrypted, unsigned. I found something, an old photo from a 1977 newspaper archive. You're in it, but the name tag on your uniform is blurred, deliberately, and I think I can find more like it. I want to help. Raymond stared at the screen, his throat tightening. Maybe that was the real threat. Not the documents, not the voice recordings, not even the mission logs, but a younger generation refusing to let the truth die silently. That night, Raymond stood by the safe house window as dusk settled across the city. In the distance, sirens cried faintly. Trains rumbled. A child's laughter floated through a broken alley. He whispered a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Mitchell, Carter, Taylor, all of you. He didn't say the rest. He didn't need to. They were coming back, not as ghosts, but as witnesses. The Senate Intelligence Committee chamber was colder than Raymond expected. Not the temperature, though the marble walls and high ceilings didn't help, but something deeper. A chill that came from being surrounded by men and women who had already decided what they believed before he opened his mouth. He sat alone at the witness table. No uniform, no medals, just a charcoal suit that didn't quite fit, in a calmness that ran bone deep. Commander Alex Monroe sat 2 rows behind him, suspended from active duty, but unmoved in principle. On the far side, Jalen Brooks sat quietly among the public observers, clutching a folder of yellowed newspaper clippings and printed photographs. Next to him, Elijah Boyd leaned forward, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a former operator who never truly retired. The chairwoman called the hearing to order. Mr. Ellis, Senator Hawkins began, you are here to present claims of classified operations that allegedly involved you. Claims the Department of Defense has denied, and which, if true, would indicate a systemic effort to erase your service record. Is that correct? Yes, Senator. You also claim racial bias played a role in this erasure. Raymond didn't blink. Not just bias, policy. The room stirred, cameras clicked softly from the press's balcony. Somewhere off to the side, a Pentagon lawyer scribbled faster. You have documents? Hawkins pressed. I do. He reached into a leather satchel and withdrew a stack. Mission logs, internal memos, redacted orders with matching unredacted versions. He spoke steadily, each sentence carved into stone. I led 71 missions between 1975 and 91. Cambodia, Laos, Nicaragua, Angola, Iraq. Not one official citation. Not one mention of my name in any after-action report. But I was there. I kept records because I knew no one else would. The panel reviewed the evidence in silence, but the next senator was less reserved. Senator Radcliffe leaned in, lips tight. Mr. Ellis, isn't it possible, likely even, that you've misremembered the nature of your service, that perhaps you were attached to administrative roles and imagined more? Raymond met his gaze. Is that how you erase people, Senator? You tell them their memory is a mistake? Radcliffe scowled. I'm 67. I forgot where I put my keys. I don't forget the sound of bullets ripping through jungle air. I don't forget dragging wounded men 5 miles under fire. And I don't forget being ordered to stay behind so a white officer could get the extraction credit. Gasps fluttered through the chamber. From his seat in the back, Monroe stood slowly. Permission to speak, Madam Chair. Hawkins hesitated. Commander Monroe, you are not recognized. I was saved by Phantom Echo's actions. I owe him my life. I owe my career to a man this government buried because they couldn't stomach the truth, that the best operator we ever had was black, silent, and inconvenient. Security moved toward him. Monroe didn't resist. He simply looked back at Raymond and nodded once. Raymond turned to the panel. I'm not asking for medals. I'm asking for the truth. Outside, a storm was brewing, not from the sky, but from the crowds gathering beyond the barricades. Veterans, students, journalists, and activists had begun to chant Raymond's code name. Phantom Echo was trending in 30 states. Thousands had watched the hearings live stream. And inside the Capitol, Senator Hawkins recessed the committee in a daze. But as Raymond exited, 2 men in dark suits stepped into his path. You need to stop, one said calmly. We're offering you an enhanced pension, private recognition, and medical benefits if you agree not to testify further. The operations you have described are still classified. Raymond didn't stop walking. I've already given my testimony. Then we'll make sure no one believes you. Raymond glanced back at them. Then you better hope I'm the only one left. That night, Elijah spread old photographs across the safe house table. There's enough here to bring down half a command chain, he said. Raymond studied a crumpled image from 1979. 3 black operatives stood behind a row of smiling white officers receiving medals. Their names had been cut from the caption. But they were there. They always had been. They erased our names, Raymond whispered, but they forgot. We never needed theirs to exist. Rain fell softly on the National Mall that Sunday morning, mist curling at the base of statues and folding gently across the quiet crowd. Thousands had gathered, shoulder to shoulder. Umbrellas bobbing like solemn flags. There was no military parade, no official anthem, but there was a stage. And on it, for the first time in his life, Raymond Ellis stood fully visible. Dressed not in uniform, but in a simple dark coat, he looked out over the crowd and saw what decades of silence had built: resilience. Beside him stood Jalen Brooks, holding a folder filled with rediscovered records. Behind him, Elijah Boyd, eyes sharp, still guarding what no government could erase. And at the edge of the stage, walking with deliberate steps, came General Thomas Parker, the same man Raymond had once carried through enemy fire, the same man who now wore a medal because Raymond had given up his name for it. Parker stood at the microphone. "Decades ago, I was saved by a man whose name I wasn't allowed to write in my report," he said, voice unshaken. "Today, I write it with pride. Raymond Ellis, call sign Phantom Echo, is not just a hero. He is a reckoning." The crowd erupted in applause. Some cried. Some simply stood in stunned reverence. As Parker stepped aside, Raymond approached the microphone. For a moment, he didn't speak. He let the silence settle. He had lived in it long enough. "When I was 22, I was recruited to serve my country in a program that didn't exist," he began. "I served in jungles, deserts, cities with no names because I believed in something larger than myself." A pause. His gaze swept the crowd. "But when the missions were done, my country erased me, not because I failed, but because I succeeded in a black man's body." The wind picked up, tugging at banners and flags. His voice grew steadier. "For years, I believed the silence was my duty. That service meant surrendering visibility, that being erased was just part of the job." He shook his head. "Not anymore." Cameras flashed, phones recorded. History was being unburied in real time. They took my name from reports. They gave my medals to others. But what they couldn't take was memory, brotherhood, or the truth that always survives those who fear it. He reached into his pocket, holding up a tarnished nameplate, one that had once been stripped from his uniform before a mission. It read, ELLIS. "I don't need a statue, I don't need a book, but I need you, this country, to remember that courage comes in many colors, and none of them deserve to be invisible." Applause thundered through the mall. In that moment, it no longer mattered how long they had waited to recognize him. He had outlasted the silence. That evening, Raymond had returned to his apartment. The medal presented to him, finally publicly, rested in a glass case on his table. But more important than the medal were the letters he had begun to receive. From cadets, from veterans, from children whose grandfathers had been just janitors, but now carried a second look, a second chance. Jalen's community group had grown into a national initiative, Shadow to Service, documenting forgotten veterans whose names were once omitted. Elijah had testified before Congress, and Commander Monroe after facing his near court-martial, was reinstated, now serving as head of a task force on recognition reform. Raymond Ellis did not return to mopping floors. He returned to mentoring, to remembering, to finally be seen. Reflection. The lesson carried forward. Raymond's story isn't just about one forgotten veteran. It is about the many whose service was never written in books because of the color of their skin. It is about a system that rewarded silence over truth, obedience over dignity, and about the quiet revolution that begins when just one man chooses to speak. The true measure of patriotism isn't medals or applause. It's the willingness to serve a nation that might never thank you and the courage to demand that it should. In remembering Raymond Ellis, we remember that history is not just written by those in power. It is reclaimed by those who refuse to disappear.